Hello, my name's Jim James, and welcome to the latest episode of the PR Moments. Well, we're going to talk about mental wellness today. And to do that, we're going to go all the way to Portland, Oregon, known for its outdoors, for big sporting companies, and also for Mark Mohammadpour, who is the Chief Wellness Officer and the founder of a company called Chasing the Sun. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. Pleasure to be here.
Now, Mark is over there, but the people that have got the best location are Jennifer and I, because we're in England. And Jennifer Gray, who is the digital PR lead at a company called Green Park Content, is in Sevenoaks, Kent. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Jim. Lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you both here. And we're going to talk about mental health in the industry. And we know that the research done by Prowley shows that a lot of people in the industry, in the public relations industry, are really struggling with mental health. There are a lot of challenges taking place. And today we're going to talk about some of those challenges, what you can look out for with your colleagues, and also some of the tools and tips that people like Mark and Jennifer have got for us on how to manage that. So Mark, first of all, tell us about PR and how you think that PR is so important in the industry today, and some of the stresses and the strains that you think come from being in public relations.
Thanks, Jim. Happy holidays to everybody. PR is a stressful industry. It's ranked alongside one of the most stressful professions out there. And I think one of the challenges that we have is our connection with the industry and the impact that we have. We are truly business and trusted advisors. We impact the bottom line of businesses. And sometimes we forget that. I think that all we do is send out LinkedIn messages and write speeches and pitch media, but really we have an impact on business. And we saw that in COVID. We had to craft messages that had to be sent, received, and delivered and to help save lives. And it's important for us to remind ourselves of that, not to put pressure on ourselves, but to really understand that everybody in this profession has an impact.
Well, Mark, and you say the other aspect of PR is that the speed of PR and the role that we play now in the industry has moved on so quickly because of digital, hasn't it? Now, Jennifer, you are the head of content, digital content at Green Park Content. Tell us, what do you see as some of the sources of stress now in your agency for you and your team with the advent of digital, but also of AI?
So as the digital PR lead in Green Park Content, we haven't been quite as impacted by AI as some of our fellows over in the content department, but it's definitely been something that's worried everyone. And definitely the landscape of marketing is changing more than it ever has before, particularly in the digital realm. I know that we picked up on AI then. Everyone's still talking about that one, but you've also got TikTok, you've got Instagram, what you've got is more and more nebulous niche communities that it's getting harder and harder to reach, who are more and more savvy around advertising and slightly worried about perhaps engaging with something that's not actually true or unique or from the heart. So in terms of the stresses that we see with our clients, we like to think of ourselves as experts in the audience, and we do tend to work with people specifically from those audiences in order to connect with them well. But then obviously as well, there are other things that we must take into account, such as the tone of voice as it stands, their advertising historically, the kind of stories that they're comfortable telling to the press and in what way. And sometimes, you start at point A and instead of ending up at point B, you end up at point C, and then you have to do a little bit of a changeover. So the stresses that we see are all to do with not quite knowing where we fit in, and also feeling a bit threatened about what's coming next, I would say.
Well, Mark, Jennifer raised an interesting point. I ran a PR firm for 25 years in Singapore and China and India. One of the stresses that I used to feel was that the agency was always the last to know and yet the first to act, right? We got the information from the client last, but we had to go first into the market before the sales teams and so on. Just tell us, in your view now, because you also worked in big agencies, I believe, like Weber, including Weber Shandwick, where do you see as the sources of stress for people sort of over and beyond just even the client tension? Because there's a lot of stress, isn't there, for people in PR because they're in PR, not just because of the jobs they're doing.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges that we have is trying to get a seat at that table, to be a trusted advisor. part of, I think, some of the mystique that we might hear in popular culture is that PR is here to fix problems, to solve crises, when really our role is to build relationships, and in a lot of cases, stop the crisis from happening in the first place. We can save businesses a lot of money and a lot of time, a lot of turnover if we're brought in at the beginning. And that's everything from a big picture strategy to how a spokesperson talks about something in a media interview. And so the more that we can show our impact and talk about those case studies in a way that talks about in terms of real financial business impact, the better. And I realize that's a challenge, especially in the squishy industry, which is why companies like Prowly are so great to be able to help make that happen. But the more that we can do and show that we are true partners, that we're here for the business, the better.
But, talk about partners, there was some research in Singapore many years ago that ranked public relations consultants as one of the least trusted and least liked professions after, sort of robbers and, serial killers and stuff like that. And I think lawyers were above PR people. So that was good news. But, as an industry, people in PR actually very much want to play that kind of role that you talk about. But a lot of the stress comes from the fact that as an industry, we're not seen to be playing that role, but more like spinmeisters and hiding the truth. Mm-hmm. Jennifer, with your team there at Green Park Content, how do you, if you like, help with, if you like, the psychology, the mentality in your team that actually your team are doing great work, but they may not be seen to be that essential? Because there's a bit of a challenge there, isn't there, for people that are in the industry?
Well, it's definitely a really good question, Jim. I think what we do pretty well, I would say, is that we know that if everyone else is against you, then it's really important that you are a team, that you are on each other's side. And that has to go from the most junior to the most senior member of staff in that department. It has to be very clear that I am on the side of my staff, and that also that they know that we are all around them, and that some ways of speaking and that some misconceptions about the industry are actually either false or shouldn't be allowed, something you can always talk to with your fellows about. And then in terms of the work, particularly when a campaign's not getting pickup, there's several things that we try to do. We try to demystify the idea of getting things wrong being a bad thing. We allow space for failure. So in our weekly meeting, we don't just share our wins from each account, from each person. Everyone gets a chance to talk. They also talk about their challenges. And then it is part of the meeting that the entire team will then move in to help them with those challenges. And it's got to the point now where some people bring personal challenges to the meeting, and we tell them, everybody was telling me how to not get a cold last week before this. So that was quite nice.
It's pretty high level conversations you have in your agency then. How not to get a cold. I will dial in to your weekly meetings. Mark,
yes,
Jennifer's also raised a really good point about the need for the team to come together, because normally in an agency there's there's some senior consultants, and then you have the leverage of 2 to 4 consultants below that and below that. So often you have quite a pyramid, in fact, in an agency with a lot of young people and a few older people. In Chasing the Sun, when you do work now for agencies, the kind of companies that used to lead when you worked at Weber Shandwick, what kind of practices do you help agencies and companies to put into place to help kind of share the stress, and to let those younger people who are often new and so keen to please know that they've got the team with them? What do you recommend?
In this remote hybrid world, and even when we were all fully in person, things get miscommunicated. And the more that we can be upfront and honest and transparent about expectations, the better. And one of those exercises I work with agency teams, in-house teams, and even as a collective is what I call a workplace expectations charter. And the output is literally a 2-page document. 1 page talks about what is the team, what's in scope, what's outside of scope, how is work delivered. And then the second page is essentially a list of previously unwritten rules around expectations that the team as a collective need to get agreement on. And these are things like, what are our core hours? How are we spending our time on vacation? Why do meetings need to be scheduled? The more back-to-back video calls without breaks, the more stress goes up. There's research from Microsoft that talks about that. How are we prioritizing tasks? And a number of categories that we don't talk about as a team, hiring managers should be discussing with prospective candidates, and agency teams and client teams should be discussing on a regular basis, and in particular when they're onboarding. So my friends who are onboarding new accounts in the new year, have a discussion with your client side counterparts on how are we going to be working day in and day out. We could save hundreds, if not thousands of minutes or hours on meetings, better understanding about priorities, impacts productivity, and ultimately impact for the business and the well-being of those who are working on those teams.
Mark, I think that's a wonderful structure. What I used to have at East West PR was what I called a service level agreement. That was an addendum to the financial agreement and the scope of work. So, you said you deliver this many press releases per month or quarter. You had the financial implications, and then we'd have, these are the hours that we work. These are the escalation routes that you have, because I found some senior clients would put a lot of pressure on the junior staff without me knowing over the weekend. And once I found out about that, I put in place these SLAs. And that was a really useful part, to have a conversation as the owner of the agency with the client in front of the junior staff, to lay the boundaries with the client, that it's not that the client pays and therefore you work for them full time. And that, especially in Asia, in India, people pay one fee and have almost unlimited hours. And in China, that was the case as well for a long time, when labor was less expensive and people were so keen to work that there weren't these boundaries at all. Mark, you do raise a point there about people working too hard, and about, let's talk about it, burnout, right? And we have the devices now that enable us to work from anywhere, at any time, and most importantly for clients to get a hold of us at any time, right? So what's your advice? How do you tackle that kind of always on 24/7, 365 mentality or approach?
Who wants to go first?
Yep.
You want to go for it?
I don't mind. Jennifer's keen. I thought you were having a break, Jennifer. You see, Jennifer's in Europe. You see. She's on 5-minute breaks. She doesn't smoke, so she's not going out for a cigarette break, which is what we used to do. Cigarette break every hour. Jennifer, you go ahead and you answer the question then, and then Mark can have a break, which in America they don't apparently get a lot of. So Jennifer, what about you? Breaks? I love it. Mark's even got a matching yellow water bottle with the wall. He's really on brand here. Jennifer, talk about, how do you help your team members at Green Park Content to turn off?
First of all, I'd like to apologise to Mark. I feel I stole his thunder there. But in general, turning off is a thing I'm a big fan of, because this is one of my little drums I like to beat. I am someone who suffered from burnout several times in my own career. And it hasn't even been that long. So it's definitely...
Yeah, I was going to say, you kind of, wow.
a big issue. And again, it made... that point you made about pressure being put on junior staff who may learn to think that that's expected from them is something that I can get quite hoppy about. In terms of how we run things at Green Park, and the best way that I think is to run things is when we run a global team. So I have team members in Italy, I have team members in Spain, I have team members in both Americas, let's say. And there is a very different culture in all of those places around things like annual leave and taking breaks. It's very obvious that those from Europe will feel entitled to use their annual leave, will be aware of, things like they can stop at their contracted hours, stop time. But then when you move it over to America and LATAM, not so much. People will need to be reminded to take holidays, and there just seems to be this sort of culture of fear that if you're not seen to be sort of pulling your weight, you're eminently replaceable. Now, I think as a manager, one of the things that I can do for those people is to, basically reassure them and make sure that they all know that they bring something different to the party. They're all in the room for a reason, and none of them are replaceable. And, particularly when we hire juniors, we tend to tell them that, we are hiring a junior position for a reason. this is, you are the best person for that job. You show that potential. We want to grow you, rather than just treating them as sort of grunts. I've worked in agencies where people are almost put against each other and given link targets personally for the month, or coverage targets personally for the month. And then they're almost supposed to fight each other for the best position. I find that most PRs are kind of quite creative and quite gentle souls, and they don't like fighting each other. And actually they're not at their best when they're not working together. So it's all about, again, driving home those values of teamwork, being on each other's side. And also just, if you have a staff member who's not taking holiday, who's not taking breaks, reminding them that that's a good idea, that they should be off if they're sick, that they should be off if they're tired. And that tends to, I hope, help us achieve some level of non-burnout.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, setting some boundaries. Mark, you've had your break while Jennifer was talking, so you're back. What would you say? So in America, as Jennifer says, you have a different issue with the Americans and Latin America, and your employment contracts are fundamentally different in America, aren't they? People are often on turn up tomorrow, you keep getting paid, right? You don't have the same kind of employment contracts and employment law, and you also don't have social security payments either as a fallback, right? So structurally, economically, politically, America's different. How do you help people who are in the industry who are feeling like if they don't work all the time, they might come back and there's no desk for them to work at?
Yeah. I think part of the mindset over the last few years is, when my first job in my first agency was 14 years. And I think that's a different mindset today, and understanding that our job is just a chapter in a very long book. And I think that's a mindset shift over generations, even outside of PR, that we've experienced. But, Jennifer and Jim, I'm jealous of my friends in England and in Europe and other countries that prioritize taking time off. We have a big mental challenge here in the United States around taking time off. And one of the things I work with teams on is setting a proactive approach to this. And, every 6 months, I ask people to take at least 1 week off, if not longer, every quarter, every 3 months to take a long weekend, and every month to take a day off or a half day, and proactively put that in your calendar. And that'll be an ask today for all of you watching, is to look throughout the month of December, look at 2024 and set that in your calendar, work with your manager. And then on top of that, back to the what's going to happen when I come back, work with your teams on delegating priorities that while you're out can be done. And then when you're back, one of the things I work with teams on is a while you are out email. So if you're on our team, and I was on vacation and you two are covering for me, I would come back that Monday or whenever I'm back, and there would be an email for me that says, Mark, here's the one email you need to look at while you're out. And it can capture as much as possible of those hundreds or thousands of emails can consolidate. And then when you are on vacation, on paid time off, we would do the same thing for you. Doesn't matter if you're an executive vice president or an intern, everybody in between. Everybody should have that sort of output in their inbox. I think that alone, those two things alone, setting proactive paid time off and a while you're out email, can reduce a lot of stress and anxiety and empower people around the world to take the time off that they have earned and deserve.
Well said. And I think that, by the way, if anyone's got any questions for Mark or Jennifer, you could put them in the box. And Michaela, who's in Spain, you can't see her because she's in Spain. Now, I'll take some time off. I want to work for Prowley. It seems just amazing. She's in Spain, but she'll take your questions and feed them through to us. Another thing I think maybe just worth mentioning is that if you're in a team, to talk with the clients about when their high load activities are going to take place, because a lot of the stress comes from when you're away and the client needs something, right? So, like I did work in the finance industry sometimes, an IPO or a trade show. It was just going to cause problems if you try and take time off just before the red herring goes out. It just doesn't make sense. So some conversation with the client in advance about when they're going to have high demand, or with the agency team, when there's going to be high demand and when you're going to be needed, is also really important. So one of the things that we've talked about before is about how an agency is treated by the client, right? So we just talked about trying to get the client to share with you when they're going to need you, or get to share with the agency. Jennifer, what's the role or the way that you at Green Park Content deal with clients so that they treat you and your ideas with respect and treat you like part of their team. Because one of the biggest problems with an agency is that you feel like you're kind of last in line, right? And the client tells you what to do. And that's a source of stress. I talk about the sort of structural source of stress. How do you solve that problem, Jennifer, where client just kind of goes, well, right, it's Friday, 4:00. This needs to be ready by Monday, which used to be in Singapore, that was a great, a great thing that people would give you the basket on a Friday at 4:00 and say, by Monday, I want it revised. How do you deal with that, Jennifer?
So it's a bit of a tightrope, but we're really lucky to have a really amazing client services team who support us as specialists to kind of build and grow those relationships over time and make sure that the clients know about when our working hours are, when we'll be on holiday, when we need to be informed of things in order to be able to give a realistically timed response, and also what we can bring to the table. And I mean, I'm nowhere near as wonderful as any of those people that I just mentioned, but when I'm in the position of needing to talk to a client or being a key client contact, that's definitely also something I try to do. And I also try to humanize the process and push for transparency. Now, it's very difficult for us to say we would like to take a seat at the table if we then aren't able to properly measure and get our results against the business objectives the stakeholder we're speaking to cares about. And it's also hard for us to firm things up, like we leave at 5 p.m. on a Friday, every Friday, the whole team goes, if that client we know consistently works until 8 p.m. at night. So it's all about getting to know their specific personality, but also about making sure that we're saying, look, these people, we bring them to meetings, we're not mean to them, almost kind of thing. We treat them as a fellow human being. They have left the office, perhaps I can help you. And it's more on the senior staff to kind of have a bit of a glance at what's happening if there is likely to be something outside of work hours. But we're also pretty firm in terms of setting restrictions around, there's only so much that we can do in a day. You pay for our time. We work on a resource level. I can absolutely get this to you. Also, I can absolutely make it better by giving you these bits of data knowledge. But also, to do that, I will realistically need the time to do it properly, and just focusing on that quality conundrum and what we can actually bring to the table when we're given the time to be able to execute has always worked really well for me.
Jennifer, that's great. And sort of managing client expectations, I think, would maybe be one way of looking at that as well. And Mark, what about you in terms of with Chasing the Sun, and how are you helping the agencies you work with deal with clients? Because we talked about that being a source. Well, it's the fundamental source of stress, isn't it? What the client needs is not necessarily structured in the way the agency can deliver it when the client needs it. So how do you help with that?
One of the things I work with companies on is understanding the perspectives of the clients. And this is not only for agency teams, this is for in-house teams. Well, we're talking a lot about the agency, but in-house teams have the same challenges, right? They receive requests from the executives, and sometimes they have to pass it to an agency, or if they don't have an agency, they're taking it all in. I think one of the exercises I work with companies on is creating an empathy map. It's understanding what are the motivations of the stakeholders, of the executives, of people who are really making the decisions. How are they being measured? How are they being influenced? What's important to them? A lot of times we might get a request from an executive that doesn't really completely tie into the objectives of the business. And it's kind of, why are they doing this? And once we dig in deeper and understand their motivation, it helps on a number of perspectives, right? It helps from our mental health standpoint to be able to say, are we really wrong in our recommendations? Like, no, we have to think about it in terms of their perspective and what's important to them. It also helps in terms of prioritization, Jennifer, as you were talking about pushing back. It's how do we feel empowered, not only between the agency and the client, but within the agency team to be able to speak with our managers who might be giving us a set of instructions or an ask. That manager, that client may not know the other 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things we're working on. So it's a choice, and that's a message back to them. I'm happy to prioritize this. However, these are the 4 things I'm working on now. What do you think is a priority? How would you like us and our team to prioritize your time? And put it back in their hands to make a decision. I think that's a very empowering message that no matter if you're an intern or an executive vice president or an owner of a firm or you're a PR director in-house, it's a very powerful way to be able to push back in a gentle way, in a service-forward way, but in one in which is going to help protect you and your team.
I love that, Mark. And one of the things that I used to do was to do a workflow map with clients, and we would work through the hierarchy of who's involved in which organization and who was in the approvals chain. And I automated the process. We haven't really got much time today, but another way of reducing stress is actually to remove the human element, isn't it? Because many of the processes are repeatable. And you can use something like, Proudly, for example, is brilliant for this, for press release authoring and approvals. There's a workflow in there. Other tools, whether it's Asana or Trello or Zoho, have got workflow rules that mean that you can actually remove much of the admin work that those junior people have if you in advance work on the workflow. Thanks for that, Jennifer. I knew you were going to mention automation. She's got that look, Jennifer. So I want to talk automation. She looks techie to me. Now, Jennifer, I'm not letting you off the hook because I know you want to talk about automation, and I stopped you there. So forgive me for that. We haven't got that much longer, but I'm just thinking, so we're going to have about 4 or 5 minutes left. If we've got people listening to this now who have got people they're thinking about, would there be one piece of advice, one tool that you can give that would help them with their day and their week on managing wellness with the team?
So I'll go first.
No, you're first. She's talking about automation, so I'm going to ask you that. We only have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask you to be relatively prompt.
Fair. Probably to give yourself grace and just say no. There's a real power in being able to say no. This is just push back and make a line in the sand, but also to know that you aren't a machine. You're not supposed to work like a machine, and that's the beauty of you. And you're in this industry for a reason. So go get them, Tiger.
I did love it. That's wonderful. Yeah, if I'm getting down, I'm going to come to you, Jennifer, and get you to give me a pep talk. Mark, over to you in Portland, Oregon. Other than going out in the beautiful countryside there, what would you recommend for people that are managing wellness in their teams and would love to have one takeaway from today?
One of the reasons why I launched Chasing the Sun is I've lost and kept off 150 pounds over the last 15 years. In kilograms, it's probably over 100, I think, if I know my math. I don't know. It's a lot.
Well, that's as much as I weigh. I mean, I only weigh 75 kilos. So yeah, it's me. You lost me, Mark.
I lost one of you. One of the things I work on with clients is to create their well-being plan, and it can cut across mental, financial, whatever they want to do for their well-being. It's 4 steps. What do you want to prioritize? What's the experience you want to have as it relates to prioritizing your well-being? At a tactical level, what are you going to do? How are you going to make time for it? And when things don't go your way, what's your backup plan? So for instance, when I started my weight loss journey, I looked at my breakfast and I started eating more healthy breakfast wraps and drinking green tea. I cut my caloric intake by 70%. I made sure that I made time for working out and blocked that in my calendar. And if my local coffee shop didn't have the breakfast wrap, I knew what the backup plan was right away. So have your team think about your own individual well-being plan and make sure it's in a way that is relatable, practical, and actionable, and it cuts across any different type of well-being you're looking to improve.
I love that, Mark. And of course, what you're also explaining there is that wellness actually does start with the individual, right? And if you're the leader of the team, taking care of yourself is a great role model and a great example for everybody else. And you can then do that together. And conceivably, you could do that also, with your clients too, right? So, so that's wonderful. Jennifer Gray, as the digital PR lead at Green Park Content, thank you so much for joining us on the Proudly episodes today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And Mark Mohammadpour, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Portland, Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yeah. Holiday, Jennifer, we shouldn't be working, apparently. It's a holiday.
No, let's immediately leave our desks.
Yeah, we're stopping. It's 1:30. We're stopping. The first thing I would say is that that I always said to my team was that there's always going to be a need for communication and for communicators. Don't worry about your job, because there will always be a need for people who help other people to communicate. And that is what PR does. So sleep easy, take some time off. Jennifer, you and I can definitely take some time off. And Mark and Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you listening, really hope you've enjoyed it. This will be recorded and available for replays on the Proudly.com website. So thank you for joining me, Jim James, your host, and we'll let you know when the next Proudly PR episode is coming up. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.